All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. I am your host, Cardin Ellis, with Cody the Oracle.
Hey, everybody.
And it's official. The Pope has, we can't say endorsed UBI, but basically...
No, he's endorsed
UBI.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? You could superimpose upon that your own definition of UBI, and he didn't get into details, but basically the Pope endorses UBI. And this is on the heels of Jack Dorsey pledging 28% of his personal wealth to programs that are going to help aid in the coronavirus pandemic. And a large portion of that will be put indeed towards his own UBI. It almost sounds like a joke, Cody, like, you know, Jack Dorsey and the Pope walk into a bar. I haven't figured out what that joke is yet, but you can leave us the punchline in the comments. Cody, tell us what's going on.
All right. So to your point, what we saw yesterday was, and the reason why I wanted to bring this up and why it's significant, Pope supports a lot of different causes. Pope gives a lot of different speeches, but he was giving his Easter address yesterday, which I'm not a Catholic, but I do believe that's one of the bigger addresses he gives during the year for the Pope, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so,
actually, it's arguably the biggest address.
I heard it's an important day.
Anyways, exactly.
But he goes on to mention, and this is a quote from the Pope. He actually wrote this down in his address. He said, "This may be the time to consider a universal basic wage, which would acknowledge and dignify the noble essential tasks you carry out. It would ensure and concretely achieve the ideal at once so human and so Christian of no worker without rights." In the original text, the Pope uses an expression. Cardin, could you read that?
In the original, el salario universal, which is, universal basic income. Well, it's technically a universal salary, but that's also their word for income. The translation is rough, but it's basically a direct translation of universal basic income without the basic.
I will say, I don't speak Spanish. I think, so it's good to know El Salario Universal means what I think it is.
El Salario.
I know, I'm bad at accents. But he goes on just a couple more things. He says, "I hope in this time of danger will free us from operating an automatic pilot, shake our sleepy consciousness, and allow a humanist and ecological conversion that puts an end to the idolatry of money and places human life and dignity at the center." I know.
Trust me, I know my pontificating verbs.
I might forget out of this one. But just a little bit that was interesting. That was a little bit of what I think that some of the stuff is kind of, you know, it's like the Pope. He's not like the leader of any kind of country. He can't like give what's what I'm looking for guidelines on laws and
legislative parameters, I believe is what you're looking for.
But I do think it's something that we're seeing in a lot of countries politically, though. This idea that we do kind of need to shake something up. I think that's one way of putting it. You could say a lot of countries are feeling this kind of sense of things on like a sense of autopilot or a direction people do want to shift. So I thought that was interesting. And then mentioning something like a humanist. I think that's a word I thought was fascinating. The idea of humanists being in more influential positions. But again, one of the biggest speeches of the year for the Pope, and he uses a decent portion of it to mention how important essentially universal, we can argue what universal basic income really means, but what he says here is I think a universal basic wage that acknowledges and dignifies the noble and essential tasks we carry out sounds a lot like what the freedom dividend's about. I think you know what that sounds a lot like to me? That sounds a lot like a stay-at-home housewife's value being put at zero in the economy, right? Sounds a lot to me like that same kind of line of thinking, that we need to stop thinking of things that way. This is actually so interesting from the Pope to see that.
Yeah. Well, this is actually the reasoning that I feel I connect with most, is the moral reasoning. There's great economic arguments that, this is capitalism that starts at 1,000 instead of starting at 0. We measure GDP wrong. Yeah, I got this and that. But in reality, I feel a lot like Elon Musk. You got to watch that interview where he first talks about universal basic income. And I remember how he tilted his head back and he was just kind of like envisioning a future. And I liked how he said, I don't view it as if we should, it's going to be an inevitability. We will have to. And then we can focus on the deeper, more spiritual questions of humanity, other than just like, how do we get by to the next day?
See, but I got to be honest, some of these rich people, like even, I'm not gonna get on Jack Dorsey, because I think Jack Dorsey might have more pure intentions, especially because the majority of this, and again, we'll get into the news this really quickly. If you guys haven't heard, just going back roughly about a week ago now, actually, was that Jack Dorsey announced that he's going to be moving $1 billion of his stock in Square. People asked why not Twitter. money processing makes a lot more money than Twitter, I think. So Square's got a bunch of money. I mean, $1 billion, mostly to address coronavirus relief. And then after that, he's going to continue the fund going to address a couple things: girls' health and education and UBI. So a couple specific instances, one of them being UBI. I thought that was really interesting. And this article mentioned something I was going to bring up in a second, that Andrew Yang has helped raise the profile. Former presidential candidate and tech executive Andrew Yang. They cannot mention Andrew Yang without making sure you know he was a tech executive somewhere. Don't ask him where or when.
It just shows their obsession with Silicon Valley.
That's what I mean. It's at the point where it doesn't like bother me that they call him that. It's just funny because it's like not it technically could work, but it's not really that great of a description anyway. This isn't about that. I just thought that was funny and stood out to me. But so we're seeing that, but there's something else that was interesting. This was published today in the World Economic Forum's blog, titled "Coronavirus has shown us why we urgently need to make a basic income a reality." That was a little interesting seeing it was right around the same time, a day after the Pope comes out and advocates for universal basic income. We're seeing now the World Economic Forum publishing a paper about this as well. And they mentioned something in here, I think that's the kind of nuts and bolts of it, something Andrew Yang talks about a lot as well, but you were talking a lot about the kind of moral and ethical reasons for it. This gets into what some of the more practical right now why we may need it reasons. And I want to skip down to this portion where he mentions that if we're going to compare the way the coronavirus hit the United States to the Spanish flu in 100 years ago in 1920, he mentions that it resulted in over 40 million deaths globally, but while there was a recession, it was nothing compared with what is coming now. In 1920, the rising economic superpower, the United States, was able to bounce back because it had inbuilt resilience. Private debt was less than 50% of GDP. Corporate debt was insignificant. Finance was not domineering. I think the big thing here is private debt was less than 50% of the GDP.
Well, and we had a cash culture. Debt wasn't even really an option.
And by contrast, U.S. private debt was over 150% of the GDP by the time the coronavirus hit a few months ago. Corporate debt at 73%, and finance accounted for 350% of the GDP. Moreover, most of the big corporations were locked in global supply chains in which disruption at any point could be expected to disrupt the whole. This was an incredibly fragile economic system. A little bit frightening how this author is writing in the past tense. Like, did this happen like 6 weeks ago maybe? Hopefully we survived through this. But this is the big paragraph to me, is that even a small recession in such circumstances would have spiraling negative effects. This one is not a small one. Many millions of people will be unable to service their debts, resulting in mass homelessness, social illnesses, violence, and worse, while numerous corporations and small businesses will become insolvent. And that's the one thing that, I mean, it's a pretty grim prediction he is making, but I do believe this kind of shakeup we're seeing, I mean, shutdowns of supply lines that kind of have to be open 24/7 almost to maintain things. I mean, it's a little bit weird, and you look at those pictures of like pollution going away. I mean, think that's how much we travel just to maintain what we had going on before. But what's fascinating is it does seem more and more like UBI is approaching a near inevitability as the coronavirus and various pandemics and just various globalization strains continue. It appears that you kind of can't have globalization without it, because otherwise things like this start arising. You do start seeing mass homelessness, which, by the way, we're seeing mass homelessness as part of the United States already. I mean, that's already been a problem. You factor in some more, and yes, it's getting worse.
And this weird type of homelessness now that's really become a significant chunk of the population of full-time employed people that don't have enough money for a house or an apartment that are living in their cars.
Yeah.
I mean, we're setting up parking lots in Los Angeles for full-time college students, single mothers, so they don't freeze to death at night, and have a security guard walking around making somebody doesn't, steal their crap at night or try and assault them, so they can sleep in their cars in these modified minivans because that's all they can afford. I mean, this is, I do see it as inevitability, but also there's part of me that welcomes this, that the silver lining of this pandemic might be that we start looking at things differently. We're looking at our supply chain differently. We're looking at our dependence upon China and exposing their dishonesty that we on, I don't even want to say we on the right, at least on the economic right, have been barking about for 20 years. Okay. So that's great. And the fact that we're talking about universal basic income seriously is great too. But my only fear is I want to address this. I don't want us to start implementing it, but I want to make sure we do it in a way in which it doesn't result in an economic takeover of a person's life. Do you see what I'm saying? Politicians are so weaselly in their ability to, Well,
Well, I feel like if it is universal
add
basic
power
income,
to their
but if it is universal basic income, it actually is a form of legitimate universal basic income, which is no string. It's a universal basic income, no strings attached, no means.
Yeah, but what's
testing,
keeping Congress
money
from passing a
given to
law
you,
saying that,
then it's-
you know what, you get the universal basic income, unless we catch you saying hate speech or
tell you
you're a
what.
criminal. And now, you know what I'm saying?
Well, then that would then it would no longer be a universal basic income. Like if it isn't actually universal basic income, that'd be an issue if they tried to pass. Which I'm always wary of. I agree. I'm always wary of anything like, for example, I think I closed the article. Let me see if I still have it open. There was recently a lot of talk about Spain implementing a UBI. Spain's going to implement UBI, or it's already happening. Spain's implementing UBI. From what I've looked into, some of the more they came out with it, as they even mentioned, no, it's not UBI. It's what it's described as is more as essentially what we would call in America like social welfare. It's to certain groups of people targeted and means tested. It's exactly what UBI is supposed to be the inverse of. Because they mention, actually, I believe, while we're on that subject, I want to go down and it's kind of interesting because in this article we're talking about before is he brings up the issue of means testing, and there's actually a really good, I haven't heard this before, when it comes to addressing why UBI shouldn't be means tested or the problems with means testing, but check this out. It says the basic income must not be means tested. Targeted schemes directed at the poor are superficially attractive to those who know little about social policy, but there is an adage attributed to Richard Titmuss that benefits that are only for the poor are invariably poor benefits. And I thought that was but to your point, it needs to make sure that what we're talking about here is not benefits for the poor. It is a universal floor benefiting everyone, granted to everyone. And I think there is something to that. Once you kind of give any government branch or anyone this leeway to be like, well, this is some charity thing we're doing for poor people, there is always going to be a different kind of energy and motivation behind it than this is just the thing everyone gets. We have to make sure everyone gets this. It's a little bit different. I almost think that it should be, it's obviously not a constitutional right, but it should say in the bill, shall not be infringed for UBI as far as anything like that. But getting on to the next part, because I want to highlight.
Well, actually, hold on. But before you do get to the next part, I actually really like that idea of shall not be infringed, only because there's this scripture, all right, in the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormon Church, right, where it says, the Doctrine and Covenants says, the worth of souls is great in the eyes of God. It doesn't say the worth of poor people's souls, or of rich people's souls, or of means-tested people's souls. It literally just says the worth of souls is great in the eyes of God. So if you're really going to kind of apply any kind of morality like the Pope did to el salario universal, all right, you would have to say that it is for all. And I know that's going to rub people wrong that the rich are getting it too. But if our society and our government as a whole is going to say that this is how we want to do things to benefit all our citizens, it will also have to be given to the rich. And like Andrew Yang says, there's going to be boutique programs set up so they find a way to transfer to charity or to their children or whatever.
To that point,
they have.
It's one of the things that I think is really important too. That I think a lot of times I see a lot of UBI arguments and discussions kind of fall apart around weird. It's not a vacuum solution. It's not just like once UBI is passed, we shut down Congress and never pass another bill again. You would have, I guarantee you incentive programs for tax credit or something would come for people to forego their, you just simply say, I do not wish to have this $1,000 a month given to me. Instead, do X with it. Let me pay
when you do your taxes.
Yeah, let it be a tax write-off to me or something. People would do that. But here's what I want to get into, kind of tie it back to the beginning. So they have a little, their height, citing a study, big word, citing a study here from Gallup and Northeastern University about support for universal basic incomes. Now, you'll see in UK and Canada, extraordinarily high, more than 2/3 in some instances, but US at 43%. Now, this was, if you know, April through June of 2019. I believe, God, what was the first debate stage Andrew Yang appeared on? It was right around that period. I mean, this was early on in Andrew Yang's kind of early ascent as far as making universal basic income a more well-known topic in the United States. That also, you look at this compared to a Hill poll that they're referencing. I believe this poll was actually done by Harris X and The Hill. And they actually have Andrew Yang's face on this. Should the government have a UBI program? It's kind of weird the way they have it listed, but the September, so the more recent data is actually in blue, and the February data is in yellow on the right-hand side. Don't know why. But you'll notice they found around February a very similar 43%, I would say, before Andrew Yang kind of got his teeth into the U.S. public about UBI.
Yeah.
But they notice if you look by the end of September, and we're getting towards kind of midway through that really good chunk of 2019 campaigning for Andrew Yang, you already saw a 6-point increase in favorability for UBI.
That's significant, dude.
Anecdotally, I can say across other studies they've seen, yes, across the board, a just improvement in UBI as far as whether it's been approved as a policy, just general approval rating of the general idea of a UBI, but even in the more specifics I've seen it brought up pretty interesting. And what does that mean now? Well, it means over the last few weeks, going back a month now, but since the coronavirus has really been an issue, and since we've needed to go to the drawing board and say we have to do something different, our current economy's not quite handling this correctly, what is there we could try? Andrew Yang has been thrown back into the forefront for a lot of discussion. We saw him talking to the president back about a month ago, and then more and more we've seen him now being you see in this article. I like this article, again from March, because this Catherine Clifford, this was the author who wrote the article calling Andrew Yang the free cash handout candidate, and then had to change the headline like 2 hours later because of backlash. Anyway, he is now kind of rightfully so cemented himself in as kind of the face of UBI in the United States. And when it appears that right now we are trying to figure out what can we do? Like, what can we do to get us out of the hole we're in? What happens when a pandemic hits and we have, like you said, over 100% of our GDP tied up in some of these debts that we used to have much less tied up in? What do? We have to turn to something new, and we're seeing it time and time again, people going, holy cow, this UBI idea might be just it. From op-eds in the Washington Post, the World Economic Forum, and then, again, going back to what we saw just yesterday, at the Pope's Easter address. I mean, it isn't very often that you're reading in the America... I got to be honest, guys. This might be the only time I pull up the America Jesuit Review for one of our videos.
We haven't really used the American Jesuit Review before.
But that is what we're at as far as where this UBI discussion is. And while
this is literally the definition of strange bedfellows.
A little. I mean, I got nothing wrong with the Jesuits. I'm just saying that we've reached a point now where
the Jesuits are awesome.
Things are good. Things in the economy are definitely not doing great for everyone. The market's doing good. We'll see how long that lasts. But the bigger thing we're seeing here is a lot of people are turning to what is the out? What do we do next? Okay, what's the answer to people have bills and are being mandated by the government to not work so as they cannot pay the bills? That's kind of a tough dilemma to be in, right?
Yep.
I got bills and I had a job. As long as I can work, it's no big deal. But now I can't work, not because I got into a car accident, because the government's literally federally mandating me. They're going to turn the water and power off if I open the doors. Yeah, there's nothing you could do.
There's not a state that isn't already declared a gubernatorial state of emergency. There's not a state that doesn't have a no travel order unless you're essential. And there's some states that are gnarly, where they're threatening to shut off your water, take away next year's business license, or arrest you if you're not wearing a face covering in public. Which, I mean, as a total limited government guy, I'm totally fine with having protective measures being required. Okay, I'm okay with that for emergency situations that involved scientifically verified pandemics.
Entire separate conversation, but
yeah,
how do you feel about bureaucrats being given the right to tell us what an essential item is and isn't? I've seen anecdotally things like seeds for gardening, to grow plants, being listed as non-essential.
No,
I've seen clothing items anecdotally listed as non-essential. So again, separate
this needs to go away.
Happening.
This needs to go away really, really quickly. And to a certain extent, this is war, and we need to look to wartime programs and situations for our comparisons, not the wet dreams of politicians that want power or hate government and don't want government to have power. No, we need to literally look at a lot of the things we did in World War II, where we said, okay, cool, we need to produce more guns. So what tooled factories producing what goods can be shifted to make more guns? And famously, there was 500 Singer Colt 45s made. In fact, they're some of the most sought after collector's items. It can be a different subject for a different podcast, a different day. But at the end of the day, Singer sewing machines were able to retool their factories in order to produce the Colt 45 that paratroopers and officers needed, right? So our society can handle wars. We can handle pandemics. We can handle the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse if we actually just have a plan in place that we all agree on. So I really think Congress should consider a pandemic wartime set of protocols that we all either vote on or that all of our elected officials vote on, and not unelected bureaucrats put in place.
Sorry, dude. I bristle at the notion of anything this country was capable of 75 years ago, we're capable of today in the same manner. Probably different capabilities, but I don't know.
The values being the same.
I don't think they are. I think they're different. Not worse or better, but I think we've shifted in 75 years to being something different than we were then. I really do.
We stray so far from the light of God. Or
Well,
what's the meme?
Not even that. It's just that's globalization. As they mentioned, in 1920, we were able to take this. We were able to take the Spanish flu hit because we were much more isolated.
But maybe that's
it was
part
a
of our
different
problem.
world. We live in a different world now. It's just the realities of the culture had to shift with the realities of the world we live in. I mean, there's countries that
so maybe
sprung up since
globalization
then. But hold on,
has created too much interdependence.
Okay, but maybe it has. And again, an even better vision for maybe we once again find ourselves in a really weird, unique position where UBI is. I don't know. I just feel like more and more we're coming across problems that the coronavirus
UBI would
has
solve.
exacerbated. Yeah, coronavirus seems like that's not a solution.
Yeah.
UBI seems like a solution. I think it's really interesting. I mean, again, I kind of looked at it. It might seem a little bit kind of like grim to phrase it this way, but I don't know. I kind of feel like in the world we live in today, with the way things are, I think most governments are going to learn that a universal basic income just might be. I think it's going to be governments can either start giving people a universal basic income or they can start dealing with mass homelessness, social illnesses, violence, and worse. I think that's the option they're in. I don't think giving people a universal basic income is such a bad option. I think that's a pretty easy out. I mean, all I know in my entire life, I'm not big in all the different ideas about it. In my entire life, I've never once seen the United States government, I'll speak specifically for the United States government, not be able to conjure up however many trillions to billions they need to pay for something. We've paid for it with other things later, but I mean, the money up front gets generated.
We don't just conjure up treasure, we conure up blood too.
But I mean, like,
we'll send soldiers over to die on somebody else's lost cause.
Well, there is money for this stuff. I just feel like the arguments for why UBI is becoming a necessity are just becoming like, well, there might be like riots over homelessness issues if we don't. I feel like just the stakes are getting high enough now, and then we've seen it. The Pope to billionaires, people are starting to realize like the stakes are getting really high. We have to do something. And hey, maybe this UBI idea was really important. And then the reason why I wanted to bring all this up is at the end here. We've talked a lot about kind of Andrew Yang, the legacy of that Yang 2020 campaign, I guess. Him running, what it did, what it meant, where it means for the future. I'm not going to say that the Pope is out there talking about UBI because Andrew Yang ran for president. But, I mean, I don't think with a straight face people could tell you that UBI's profile has not been raised in America because Andrew Yang ran for president on it, defended it in multiple debate stages, and is now probably a higher profile public individual now than when he was running for president, talking about UBI all over the place. Like, that's definitely something that happened. I think that was why he ran. I don't think not saying this is why he did it intentionally. I'm just saying, in hindsight, him running just to boost UBI so people know what it is when something like this does happen. Because imagine, dude, if he didn't run for president and no one really talked about universal basic income, and right now, somebody who didn't stake his entire reputation on a presidential campaign for 9 months, just some random guy was just saying like, hey, UBI, we should do it. It wouldn't ring the same. I don't feel like there'd be the same. There wouldn't be people like us who I'm like, I'm down. I was won over and you'd be like 7, 8 months ago.
Yeah, we were sold a year ago.
Guess,
you guys are all late
to
this party.
Now. But you see what I mean? Like if there hadn't been a year of him kind of building up his
UBI is what
his
birthed
flock,
this
so
channel.
to speak. Exactly. But that's the thing. Is like, I think that was really. He didn't get elected president, obviously, but cabinet positions, okay, whatever. Things. No, just getting Americans talking about UBI the way he did. That was. We're seeing now increasingly more and more like, holy cow. I mean, if UBI does get passed in the United States in the next few years, again, you have to give a shout out. There's been guys like Scott Santos working for years. Other people have been talking about this. I'm not going to say that Andrew Yang invented the theory. It's just, here was the one that ran for president, got, I don't know if you can numerically list it. He made it to almost every single debate stage and really probably could have hung in there for a few more states if he wanted to, shamelessly, like some other candidates did. But I mean, for the most part, like he basically.
He could have shamelessly hung on.
Oh,
he could have pulled a Kirsten Gillibrand, a Kamala Harris.
Well, no, Kirsten, they
bailed out early.
They're examples of the inverse. People who realize early on, ain't worth it.
And Elizabeth Warren.
And drop it
could have pulled an
immediately.
Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, but still, I mean, he really did. He didn't accomplish a whole much as far as, delegates to being elected the nominee for president, or being nominated the president for a Democrat. But like, holy cow, man, I do 100% believe we would not be talking about UBI the way we do today. I don't think there'd be as many people. I don't think it'd be called UBI like it is. I think there'd be I remember I did it once. I referenced it as UBI to someone, and they said, what is that? And then when you say universal basic income, of course, it's kind of one of those things that, like I said, I don't speak Spanish, but I kind of understood what he was talking about when I read the Spanish form of it.
Yeah. El salario universal.
Yes, but I think we're at the point where there's a lot of people can offhand refer to it as UBI. People know what that means. And I don't know. It's the biggest brand and messaging win of the 2019 primary. Seriously, he didn't win. He had the biggest brand win of anyone.
Yeah, he pushed the Overton window.
Yeah.
He was the one that pushed the Overton window in the 2020 election.
Unfortunately, people wanted the opposite, which I think is why Joe Biden won.
Yeah. Or they just didn't understand it. Let's be honest. They just didn't understand it. So and I think it's a lot more understandable that the general populace didn't understand a kind of simple but simultaneously complex idea of a UBI funded by a value-added tax. Therefore, they just kind of rejected it because they couldn't wrap their heads around it. So his victory was pushing the Overton window to a place where people started learning about it and then understanding it. I think that's a lot different than a wholesale rejection of the public. Like basically Bernie Sanders has experienced a wholesale rejection. Twice he's run and he's promised a revolution that's been led by young people. And those young people twice didn't show up to vote. And the general population basically rejected his idea. He reached the threshold of where he could go with about 1/3 of the people liking what he had to say. And that's not enough to be able to start revolutions, So, well, enough to start them, but not necessarily fundamentally transform societies.
How about this? I will say this. Bernie Sanders, not Bernie Sanders, but some people are going to have some explaining to do if UBI gets passed before Medicare for All. People are going to have some explaining to do of why they couldn't get Medicare for All passed before UBI does, as far as of why it's such a great idea. I'm just saying. Because UBI, I see very little resistance across the state. People are kind of like, you know what? Yeah, we might have to do this. But I still do see pushback and resistance against Medicare for All. So if we want to talk about brand and messaging wins, I'm just saying that would be a cold shower for some people out there pushing UBI, pushing Medicare for All for 10 years, and Andrew Yang gets UBI through in like 20 months, right?
Yeah,
that would be something. But again, that's just that's neither here nor there. And at the same time, it's just I don't know. It's more humorous.
So here's my question for you.
Actually, literally important at the end of the day. If we could get the government passing, and here's the problem. The reason why I think the other side of me says there's no way something that makes as much sense and cuts down on as much bureaucratic waste as UBI will ever get passed in America. Anything that cuts down on a lot of bureaucratic waste is just, I don't know, seems untouchable. That'll never get passed. You can't ever do that. You can only add jobs. You can only add federal jobs. You can't take them away.
Interesting.
Seems to be the case. That's all I'm saying. Like, UBI, a big part of how we're going to pay for UBI is taking away a lot of these federal jobs that are just kind of shuffling papers around, and some of these benefit offices would be closing and replacing with a more direct solution. So yeah, that's been the one thing. Looking at UBI realistically getting passed to the U.S. government, I always say, how do you go to the federal government and say I'm taking jobs away from you, reducing influence? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Clinton did. I give him credit. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, my question for you, Cody, is from here on, in light of Pope Francis advocating for el salario universal, is that just what we're going to start calling it? Instead of universal basic income, I think we should, you know what I'm saying, just say el salario universal, I think is a really good idea. Is that going to be like the new hip thing?
Well, I think, I just think that's what makes UBI effective, is because UBI transcends all languages. If UBI is just known for,
it's like love. The word exists in all languages.
Well, there's some things, because what's it called? Doctors Without Borders isn't actually called Doctors Without Borders. It's just what we call it in English.
Doctores sin fronteras.
Yeah. Or it's they use the French word for doctors, and
Actually, I think technically Doctors Without Borders in Spanish is Doctors Without Frontiers, because la frontera. See, in America, the border is could be like the border of a table. That doesn't quite translate into Spanish. So I actually think it's
similar in French. I forgot what the French one, but something. Yeah, it's like Medicine Sans Frontiers. That's with no pronunciation to it, just the words I'm reading to you. But yeah, same idea.
Right. Rock on.
Doctors Without Borders. I'm just saying, some things do exist branding-wise if you just use whatever the direct translation is in every single state. People just know what it means.
Look, I'll just tell you right now that when we cut the commercial for the when we make the announcement for UBI, once it finally gets passed, I want the Pope there, and I want Antonio Banderas to make the announcement of El Salario Universal You know what I'm saying? I think that'd be totally awesome.
Good question. I wonder how Antonio Banderas feels about UBI. We'll have to find out.
Yeah, we'll have to find. Maybe there's another celebrity endorsement out there. So anyway, we got National Treasure. Now we'll get the Mask of Zorro, right? Rock on. It was Antonio Banderas was the Mask of Zorro, right? I'm pretty sure that was him. Anyway, let us know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm still waiting for the punchline of the joke, Jack Dorsey and the Pope walk into the bar. I got a hat waiting for the person that actually makes a decent joke. And it can be dad joke punny if it has to be. But somebody that can make a decent joke in the comment section gets one of the last 3 hats that we have sitting here in the studio. Follow us on follow us on Twitter at PSP. I totally botched that one. Follow us on Twitter, PSP Radio 1. I apologize, on Facebook and on Instagram. This is Problem Solver Politics. See you guys in the next video.